Sheila, our screens are not on at all.
That do anything for you? Okay, I'm gonna restart the whole system, so give me a second.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer, tasked with conducting a hearing in OCC 24683 relating to the plugging of orphan wells and financial assurance. We have reached another public comment session. I'm joined here by Chair Chang and Commissioner Ampoma. I see Commissioner Bloom on the platform this morning. I do have a number of names of folks that I'll call out one at a time, and I'll turn to the folks both on the platform and in the room. Just a few things. I'll ask you to state and spell your first and last name because we are making a transcript. The commission rules require that I ask you to swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, and I will ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. In the event you have more to say than that, please submit your written comments to Sheila Apodaca, the commission administrator. Do we have Lane Moss with us, either in the room or on the platform? Mr. Moss, can you unmute yourself?
Mrs., not
Oh,
Miss.
Very sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Moss. Would you spell your first and last name, please?
Laynemoss.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right, I'll start your time.
Did you ask me a question?
Oh, no, ma'am. This is the time for you to make a statement. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning to everyone. My name is Lane Moss. I have lived in New Mexico for 7 years, having moved here from Arizona. I grew up in West Virginia and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I entered the insurance industry. After almost 5 years, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I worked in an insurance agency for almost 10 years and became a vice president. We chose to move west, so we located in Scottsdale and later North Phoenix. Phoenix was very small then. Later, my daughter and I moved to Honolulu, where she graduated from Punahou School, then opted to move back to Arizona. I remained in Honolulu and continued working in the wholesale insurance industry. This was an exciting change for me. I was 70 years old when I retired as a senior vice president to care for my ailing husband. After he passed, many wholesalers attempted to entice me back to work. After a total of 44 years in this business, I felt it was time to retire for good. Ending up in the beautiful state of New Mexico with my husband, who retired from the United States Navy submarine service, and enjoying the great climate and the history of New Mexico. I have become very concerned about keeping the cost of living affordable, not only for retirees on a fixed income, but for people in the small communities in this state. Increasing the cost of operating both small and large oil and gas companies by the same amount is absolutely inequitable. The current cost of the projected increase is totally unfair and should be rethought. The demand for these huge fees would impact everyone by increasing the cost of living, especially seniors on fixed income. Also, smaller communities would be impacted as well. Please consider the impact on the oil and gas industry as well as the citizens of this state if these fees are increased so dramatically. I want to thank the Oil Conservation Commission for their tireless efforts to make this happen for all of us in New Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Moss. Ken Hughes, do we have Ken Hughes? Oh, Ken Hughes is in the room. Mr. Hughes, if you would join us up here.
I cannot understand what you said. Okay.
Mr. Hughes, if you would spell your first and last name, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ken Hughes, Kenhughes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here in support of stronger rulemaking to modernize New Mexico's bonding and cleanup rules. These rules will protect New Mexico's land, air, water, health, and taxpayers. They can also lead to new uses of old wells. When I worked across the hall here at the Energy Conservation and Management Division for 13 years, our staff delved into various ways of storing energy. One of the more intriguing options suggested by a Los Alamos scientist, Mark Bebo, was microhydro, which takes advantage of elevation changes of at least 300 or 500 feet to generate and store energy. We now have in law this year the Well Repurposing Act, sponsored by State Representative Andrea Romero, that allows, quote, the conversion of oil and gas well into a facility that provides or supports energy storage or geothermal energy development, unquote. So rather than keeping wells limping along and producing a handful of gallons of oil and gas just to avoid abandonment cost, it's time to take advantage of the new law and not just abandon, but convert wells into much more useful purposes of energy storage and geothermal development. Bottom line is, if you drill it, clean it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Next, I have John Hoyt. Do we have Mr. Hoyt on the platform, perhaps? By the way, if you have dialed in using a phone, you can press *5 to raise your hand. All right, let's move to Kevin Bean. Do we have Kevin Bean?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Kevin Bean. That's Kevin. Bean. B is in boy. EAN.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I am calling in support of the rulemaking to modernize New Mexico's bonding requirements for oil and gas wells. This seems very sensible to me that that those bonds should be adequate to cover the cleanup costs once those wells have reached the end of their expected lives and have to be taken care of, lest that cost fall to the taxpayers in New Mexico. In addressing the first comment that we heard this morning from Ms. Moss, Mrs. Moss, I'll just point out that if those bonds don't cover the cost of reclaiming and cleaning those wells, then we're all going to pay for it, regardless. So it's much better to have that money up front. And it is a cost of doing this business in this state. That only makes sense to me. This problem has gone on far too long. I'm very heartened to see that the Oil Conservation Commission has seen fit to address this issue now and to modernize these rules so that these costs will be paid for by the people who are making the money, who are in this business, and that it won't fall to taxpayers to have to figure out where to get the money to clean this up. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Sayer Gerhardt? Sayer Gerhardt? Oh, all right. This is Jason Morales. Mr. Morales, can you unmute yourself? You might have to press Control-Shift-M to unmute.
Can you hear
It
me?
looks like you're unmuted. Oh,
Can you hear me?
oh, now I can. Hello.
Can you
Would
hear
you
me?
spell? Yes, I can. Would you spell your first and
Hi.
last name? Hello. Would you spell your first and last name, please?
It's it's JASONMORALES.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Good morning. My name is Jason Morales. I'm a 55-year lifelong resident in New Mexico. I work as an engineer at the Department of Defense here in New Mexico. I'm here today to express my concerns regarding these proposed regulations on the oil and gas industry. I want to be clear. I support oil and gas development in New Mexico. It's a vital part of our economy, providing good paying jobs for our families across the state and generating significant revenue that funds our schools, hospitals, and education. And importantly, a strong domestic oil and gas industry is crucial to our national security. Not long ago, the United States achieved energy independence largely due to our domestic oil and gas production. These proposed regulations threaten that independence, making us more vulnerable. This national security element is personally important to work to protect our nation. These proposed regulations are simply not practical. They impact small and independent oil and gas companies, the very backbone of our industry. These companies, unlike the larger corporations, often comprise of mom and pop businesses. To shut down means lost jobs, this opposition that seeks to eliminate oil and gas altogether. We cannot simply shut down a major industry without a viable to fund critical services. I'm not against the environmental safeguards, but the goal for reasonable and effective regulation
Are you guys getting all of this? It's just going in and out.
that are achievable.
Hold on, Mr.
This is to be
Morales.
jotted down.
To the court reporter, no, Mr. Morales is cutting out. So
Okay.
just please capture what you can. And to Mr. Morales, you've been cutting out. And I'm happy to let you finish your statement verbally, but I think it would also be a good idea for you to email it to Sheila Apodaca. Go ahead.
I can do that.
Terrific.
Ma'am? Hello.
You're cutting out again, Mr. Morales, and we can't really hear you.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
Should I?
If you would please email your statement to Sheila Apodaca,
Is that
and it'll be part of the record.
better?
No. Sheila, I think we're going to have to move on here. I'm sorry, Mr. Morales. I see John and Lisa Hoyt on the screen. Can you unmute yourselves? Now I can. Yes, it does.
Can you hear us? Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
So would you spell your first and last names, please?
My name is Lisa Hoyt, Lisahoyt.
Okay. And will John Hoyt be speaking as well?
Yes.
My name is John Hoyt, Johnhoyt.
And do you and each of you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead. I'll start your time.
I was born in Buffalo, New York, where I lived and worked for the last 78 years of my life. My wife and I moved here to Albuquerque to be closer to her family in ABQ and my sons in Utah and Colorado. After earning a degree in marketing in college, I spent most of my career in my family business, photographic supplies. We sold to all types of photographic customers, amateur, professional, medical, and industrial, and also to government at all levels, local, state, and U.S. I've enjoyed traveling by car for business and pleasure through 40 of the United States and developed a true appreciation for oil industry products. Before moving to Albuquerque, my wife and I spent several years active in the agricultural community. We assisted a neighborhood farm in day-to-day operations as well as their Sunday or Saturday markets. We were also members of our local chapter of the New York State Farm Bureau. Since moving here, I've learned how success in the oil industry has been benefit to the state of New Mexico as the second largest producer of petroleum in the United States. Many factors can affect it negatively, unfortunately, including taxation and fees, and income to New Mexico would drop by the addition of higher fees, particularly the assurance fees. Those fees, which the OCC sets the fees for and rules for oil producers, these fees would cost the industry dearly and unfairly. And a flat fee, regardless of the volume of the oil produced, would go down as a result. Obviously, smaller producers would be hurt the most. This would cut taxes to the New Mexico government, cutting aid to health, education, and many other programs. You can see greater production in New Mexico has greater value to New Mexico. The proposed operating costs, the assurance payments, would have a dire effect mostly on the smaller producers operating in our state. A flat fee causes producers to disincentivize new growth. It would kill smaller operations 5 times more often than larger companies who could absorb the increases better. And that would add to value to the state. Great value to the state would come from more production, of course. There's considerable value in growth, not loss, and add more life to New Mexico. Please consider that OCC adding these increases would affect the overall economy of the state of New Mexico.
Thank you. Ms. Hoyt?
Good morning. I was born in Virginia, spent most of my childhood in Potomac, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. In the early 70s, my family moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, and that's where I really learned to appreciate the beauty of the desert. A couple of years later, my mother and I moved to Hawaii, where I finished high school, and after graduation, returned to Arizona, where eventually I married, had a couple of kids, and in 1997, we moved to a small village in Western New York. There, I began my career as a professional photographer. My bread and butter was family portraits, weddings, and events. And later, I began going to professional photography groups around New York State, giving lectures in studio management, sales, and how to design wedding albums. After 25 years, I retired from full-time photography and started my second career, which was a great love of mine, gardening. I went to work for a hydroponic farm in our area where I tended 720 indeterminate tomato vines from seedlings through their 10-month life cycle. It was quite exciting. 6 months ago, my husband and I moved to Albuquerque to be closer to my family. Since being here, we've become aware of the impact the gas and oil industry has on our new home state. Not just the big cities, but many small communities across the state. I've learned there are many small companies within the industry, not just the giants. And while all will be affected by an increase in insurance payments, the little guys will suffer the most. And not just the folks who work for these companies, but all the businesses and industry that support gas and oil. When these gas and oil companies are forced to close their doors, the impact trickles down through the communities, not just in loss of tax revenue and funding for schools, but in loss of all these support businesses. Eventually, that trickle-down effect reaches retirees like us living on a fixed income. And as you can see by all who have and will give a little of their life stories, we represent the millions of untold stories who are affected daily by the gas and oil industry. And I would strongly urge you to consider the impact an increase in insurance payments would have on the gas and oil industry, companies large and small, but also the trickle-down effect it would have on all who call New Mexico home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoyt. Is there anyone else on the platform who would like to offer public comment during this session? There will be another session at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I see Carlos Matutes. Mr. Matutes, if you would unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Just was allowed to unmute myself. My name is Carlos Matutes, CarlosMatutes.
And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
My name is Carlos Matutes. I am the New Mexico State Director for Green Latinos. We're an environmental justice organization serving Latina communities and other communities of color around the United States. I am in full support of modernizing our bonding rules around oil and gas. Now, I wasn't always in the nonprofit world. I grew up working on small industrial equipment in South Texas. If, as a business, we would leave trash everywhere, if we would dump used motor oil and air filters and broken airlines wherever we worked, we would be fined. We would have to pay for that cleanup. No, as responsible business people, we cleaned up our messes. We made sure that a work area was left intact. That's all we're asking of oil and gas, is that they do their fair share for the profits that they pull. And much of that profit, may I remind you, goes out of New Mexico. All we're asking is for them to clean up the mess of their profit-making ventures. That is all. Leaving orphaned wells, spilling toxic waste, fracking water, or as they like to call it, produced water, which is essentially just a toxic sludge, behind for us, the taxpayers, the people of New Mexico, our communities, to clean up. Otherwise, our waters be poisoned, our soils be toxic, our air be polluted. No, we're asking the businesses in oil and gas to be responsible citizens, just like the rest of us. When we make a mess, we're asked to clean it up. And that's what we're asking for. And that's why we support rulemaking around bonding for oil and gas to clean up their messes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Matutas. Is there anyone else on the platform who would like to offer public comment during this session? Our next session is at 4 p.m. today. You can raise your virtual hand or press *5 to raise your hand if you have called in. No? All right. We will return to the technical case then. Mr. Peltz, if you would rejoin us up here. I forgot to ask if any council had a preliminary matter before we go back here. No? Okay, great. I believe all party questioning was completed yesterday, and we'll turn now to the commissioners. Commissioner Mpoma.
Good morning, Mr. Peltz.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here to offer your testimony on this important issue. I will not have a lot of questions for you, but I do have few. So I want to turn over to your slides. And this one will be slide number 9, orphan well policy reform across the states.
Great.
So my first question to you is, in all of these reforms, what were some of the motivations that were included in these reforms to motivate companies or operators to really plug their wells?
Do you mean the motivation of the legislators or regulators who put the reforms in place?
Yeah, so in terms of what were some of the benefits to the industry, in terms of some of the provisions that benefits operators that do plug their wells?
Well, there's the benefit of being a good corporate citizen by not orphaning their wells. The primary benefit of these regulations is to protect the taxpayers of the state from having to pay for plugging orphan wells. The environmental benefits also, and I think, we haven't really talked about this very much, but the presence of orphan wells tends to reduce property values. There was a study in Southwest Pennsylvania by University of Pittsburgh economists that found that the presence of orphan wells there reduced building activity by 50%, because people are understandably hesitant to build around these wells where you could have methane migration either directly into substructures like basements or via aquifers. There is also benefit to new energy development from plugging old vertical wells. I know in the DJ Basin, in the Denver-Julesburg Basin in Colorado, I was told that most vertical well plugging activity was happening in order to facilitate new shale development. And you can't frack a well if you have old vertical wells in the same formation, because you'll lose all your pressure and you'll get blowouts and things like that. And so that is a direct benefit to the industry.
I appreciate that. And then I like one of them. You said it's more or less the company will more or less become a prudent company, right? A prudent company.
Yes, I mean, no one wants to violate the law. Operators want to show that they're obeying the law in the state and that they're prudently managing the surface and the geology, I would think.
So then let me ask you, so how would you describe a prudent operator?
Well, one who, recovers the resource, obeys all aspects of the law, is a good community member, works with the people who live near the development and ask, hey, we're here, we're making money, in your community. How can, are you okay with what we're doing? How could we do it better? I know that happens often in the industry, although not always.
And then definitely the opposite of that would be the bad actors.
Right. Okay. Operators who, don't obey the law, whether through emissions or air toxics or groundwater contamination or failure to plug their wells. I see this sometimes, especially where you have an out-of-state, like a private equity-backed company, where they don't really have a nexus with the state and they don't really care what happens in the communities, and they're just there to extract as much revenue from their wells and then leave. And it's sort of easy because they put the wells in these little LLCs that facilitate orphaning. So that's a terrible case, and it seems to be happening more and more.
So you are the last witness for the applicant, right?
Yes.
So yesterday, Mr. Morgan, presented the commission and convinced the commission that the marginal wells are the ones that do have higher possibility to become an orphan well.
Yeah, well, the less a well produces, the more likely it is to become an orphan well. Obviously, that slide that I showed that had all those wells producing over 700,000 BOE per year, those aren't going to become orphan wells anytime soon. But eventually, when they're produced out, that's when the chances rise. And that's why we've come up with this risk-based financial assurance schema that's oriented around the lowest producing wells, because that's where your risk really rises.
Exactly. So you've made your case to the commission that those wells, those marginal wells, we should put $150,000 bond financial assurance on all those wells. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the proposal.
Okay. Let's go to your exhibit 66. That would be on page 20. And I do like this table a lot. I just want to be able to understand this so we can really dive much into this one.
Sure.
So will the 51,270 more or less be the total wells that are in the GOTAC database?
So it would appear, yes.
Yeah, as appear here. Definitely, I do see OCD's exhibits that shows different total number of wells, but let's just stick to this one.
Yes, if only it were so that every database had the exact same number of things.
Yeah, that would be much easier, but we don't. Okay, so in there, so at least we do have about 51,270 wells as presented in the GOTAC. Now, I really do like this one a lot because in here, you've shown the number of operators with state, private, and federal wells to be around 420. And then also the number of operators with state and private wells that more or less OCD is going to oversee is about 342. Did I read all of this correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's consistent. I remember Dwayne showed a chart that the number of operators in the state has fallen to around 400. And so that's pretty consistent with this. Also, this is the number of, I believe it's marginal and inactive wells. So that's why it's 51,000 and not the over 60,000. I'm pretty sure. The total number of wells is over 60,000, but I believe this chart is looking at marginal and inactive wells.
But okay, let's look at the green region.
Yeah.
Shaded region. That one you're saying that operators, or more or less, you're just focusing on operators that do have less than 15% marginal wells or inactive wells. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then if you are saying that the 51,000 is the total number of marginal wells, what about it? 36,000.
So 51. So I believe what this is saying is that there's 51,270 marginal or inactive wells, of which 36,020 belong to operators who have fewer than 15% of their total well population as marginal and inactive, and 15,250 belong to operators who have more than 15%. The portfolio risk operators. Which is to say that, those operators in the below 15% category wouldn't have to, they would have to have the $150,000 single well bonds for their marginal and inactive wells, but they wouldn't have to for all of their wells.
Okay, so those in the green shaded region, they are good.
Well, I don't know if good and bad is the right,
No, I'm just saying that,
vocabulary.
yeah, so I'm just saying that they will not necessarily have to put the 150,000 bond on all of their wells.
Oh, they wouldn't have to.
Okay. Now, let's focus on the yellow region. So in the yellow region, you do have about 198 operators.
Yes.
Now, let me ask this though, with regards to the operators, with this chart, or let's say the proposal that the applicant is putting across here, does that distinguish between the operators that do that more or less operating the well, and then also working interest owners, or it's just only operators that we are talking about here?
It's just the operators.
And those with the working interest is not really part of this?
Well, I mean, if there was some kind of, enforcement action, there might be some implications for the working interest owners. But this is, trying to look at separate legal entities.
Yeah, so don't you believe that there's going to be a little bit of confusion in terms of OCD implementing this, where there's going to be a confusion between operator, working interest owner, which category do they fall into? And then it more or less become a little bit of a mess.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that the OCD, knows how to work with operators and knows how to work with working interest owners, and this is what they do all day, every day. And so I don't think it'll be too confusing.
Yeah, okay, but if you look at, let's say, if you look at all the discussions that we've had here, you go all the way to even board members, in terms of people who have who can more or less operate in New Mexico.
So that's an analysis when considering operator registration and transfer to try to determine, is there a risk that this operator, because of the constituency of their leadership, might be a bad actor? That's a kind of different question than who gets what kind of bonds.
I like your explanation. So where I'm getting to is that there could be someone who is not an operator, but a working interest owner, do have multiple marginal wells, but on records, they are actually not operators. They are just working interest owners. So how are you going to be able to distinguish, go deep down to know that this working interest owner, though not operator, but is a bad actor?
Well, for the case of bonding, that's not analyzed. All that's analyzed is, does the operator have over or under 15% of their portfolio in risk. But when it comes to well transfers, which is certainly a moment where you have a change of risk, then there will be an analysis of the individuals who are involved in that operation. And that could potentially lead to a denial of transfer or some other kind of conditions put on the transfer. But all of that is at the OCD's discretion. None of what we've put in is mandatory for OCD to consider and to act on.
Yeah, let's get back to our main discussion here. Got a little sidetracked. So out of the 342 operators, this is going to impact more than 50%.
Yes.
Of operators in New Mexico.
Yes.
And these 198 operators, let me ask you, so if an operator do have 75% of their wells active, not marginal, are they bad actors?
Oh, this isn't about whether they're good or bad actors. This is about their portfolio risk.
So I'm just asking you. So I ask you, let's say we are looking for high risk companies that might default and not necessarily plug their wells.
Right.
So I'm asking you, if the company do have 75% of their portfolio in non-marginal sense, do you take them as a high risk company?
Well, yes, or potentially. But, if the surety company feels like they're low risk, then that operator will be able to get those bonds at quite a discount, and it won't have a material impact, I wouldn't think, on the operator's finances. So the surety company plays a role in this risk determination as well. On the other hand, I understand what you're saying, which is that, this is just a proxy for risk, this portfolio percentage. And so, the OCD could do a much more detailed deep dive into each operator's finances and study them and study their assets and make determinations on risk that way. But that is, as I said in my testimony, intrusive to the operator and labor intensive to OCD. And so we went with this proxy of risk as a way to simplify. And then because the surety company will make their own determination of risk, and they'll figure out how much it will cost for that operator to get those $150,000 bonds. That will, that's kind of a second order of risking that will give you the dollar amount for the operator.
So you said that OCD do have some discretion, and then also the surety bond company will also have a discretion there to determine whether this company more or less, qualify for a bond. Now, in the applicant's proposal and the marginal wells and inactive wells.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. And just to make sure I'm tracking the questions here. If I understand the conversation, though, those were two different things, right? The 15% is not discretionary under the bonding, but there is discretion under the transfers. Is that the answer?
Yes. And then also, you were saying that the surety company has some discretion. Of course they do. They're a private industry and they get to choose whether or not to provide a bond. And if so, with what premium and what collateral.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I was going to go to that to clarify that under the marginal wells and inactive wells, and that is D, section 3, an operator with 15% or more of their wells in marginal or inactive well status or a combination thereof shall provide a one well plug-in financial assurance in the amount of $150,000 for each well registered to the operator until the percentage of the operator's marginal and inactive wells is decreased below 15%. So there's no discretion to OCD on this.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you are saying that 75%, let's say operator with 75% in non-marginal wells you're saying that is a high risk.
Yes, so that's our position.
So then let me ask you, how was that 15% really determined?
So there were a whole bunch of exhibits presented by Dwayne and also by me showing how that's a natural risk breakpoint based on revenue and per well and other factors.
Okay, so let's continue on that. So out of this 198 companies, let's say they do have 15%, or more than 15% of their wells in marginal or inactive status. So they are classified as a high risk. Now, my first question to you that we're talking about was, don't you believe that the active bonding, the financial assurance required for the active wells was more or less as a sort of motivation where you cap the blanket bond at 250,000. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that, don't you believe that, according to the statute, don't you believe that the 250 cap that was put as a blanket bond on active wells shows that these wells are not really high risk?
Well, I'm tempted to ask to put up that the rainbow again, because it doesn't actually say active wells in that clause for the $250,000 blanket bond.
I mean, that rainbow thing is a really big deal.
I agree. I mean, that's the core, that's the core legislative piece that all this rides on.
But I will also tell you that according to the applicants on application to the commission, they define active wells. And in there, or let's say they adapted the active wells. And in there, they cap the bond, the financial assurance to 250,000. Why did they do that?
Well, the legislature, in its wisdom, in that first sentence, allowed the OCD to create additional categories. And so if the OCD believes that there is a class of operator that presents a systemic risk to the state, the statute allows OCD to create a category like this portfolio risk to deal with that.
Now, with your own application where you are capping active wells that do not meet marginal well category to 250,000 cap financial assurance, why should we not leave the active wells alone?
Well, so operators that don't fall into this new category of portfolio risk wells can still avail themselves of that $250,000 blanket bond.
I think also as commissioners, we have a responsibility. I'm a little bit concerned about, putting up a rule that impacts about, let's say, more than 50% of our entire operators, where in the statute, if they are following the law, if these wells, so not even necessarily the operators, if these wells are in compliance, and in here we are talking about 15,250 wells that are more or less in marginal category. And then even you were saying that this is not the total number of wells that we do have in the state.
Right. This doesn't include the wells that don't fall into the marginal or inactive status. So the higher producing wells aren't covered in this chart.
Exactly. But your 15% that you are imposing will impact all those wells that more or less the operators fall within that too.
But if those operators are low risk, according to the surety companies, their additional monthly outlay will be pretty minor.
Yeah, but that is, for us as regulators too, I don't really need to care much about what the surety bond company is going to do, but I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing here. Whilst, let's say you do have operators, even this one, let's put it, a well in compliance. A particular well is in compliance. I still do not understand why we should put 150,000 financial assurance on those wells that are in compliance. And even if the commission agrees with the 150,000 for all marginal wells, the applicant still achieved their goals here. because all these wells that, as you said, OCD will be responsible for in the future are more or less already taken care of.
Well, there is this portfolio risk question, and maybe the operator will go bankrupt and leave a lot of wells orphaned. Although probably what would happen if there is a bankruptcy, some of those wells would get bought up. That's certainly true. There's also an incentive built in for the operators to increase their production, right? And so if you increase your production on some of your low producing wells, then you can get out of that additional bonding, and that's good for the state.
So, so you brought up a good point. As an engineer and with experience in enhanced oil recovery projects, I mean, I can tell you that, and we've had this discussion extensively, where wells, you start producing primary recovery, wells will start going down once the energy is done. But it's not all the wells. Some few wells will go down in its energy. And a company, from your proposal, the company will automatically have to start water injection. I mean, from operational point of view, it's not really effective. So I'm really concerned about, let's say, these wells that are more or less getting, they are not able to produce because of the energy. But once we start putting water in, it will start coming up, right? At some point, these wells will fall into the marginal category. It will fall into that. And even once we start that water injection, it will come back up.
Right. Although it's not just, water floods and CO2 EOR. You could also recomplete the well. You could do acid treatments. It depends on the basin. Obviously, I'm not an engineer, but there's all sorts of ways to increase production.
Not necessarily, because if the oil saturation is below the residual oil saturation to, let's say, primary constraint, there's no amount of acidizing or whatever that you do will produce, because we've already hit the residual oil saturation to the primary energy. So we need to put in water to be able to more or less back it up. So it's not always that acidizing and all of that is going to work, right? And even at some point, no amount of water that you inject into the system will displace this oil. So there too, you're going to get a marginal well there. Yeah,
it's certainly true that you can't avoid marginal status forever.
Exactly. So I'm a little bit concerned about operators who will more or less have wells in compliance and still putting up $150,000 bond on them. How is that even helping us to achieve the incentives to, let's say, for these companies to plug their wells? I mean, how is that even helping us in any way here?
Well, if the operator, instead of, once they run out of options to increase production for the well, if they then say, okay, we've got to plug this one, then that takes that out of the risk pool for the state. It improves the geology. It reduces environmental risk. So that sounds like a good deal to me.
And then when they want to go to water flood, they drill another well. Is that not costing waste?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, would OCD not say that you are costing waste when you just go in there drilling wells everywhere at each production profile in the life of the field?
Well, the operator doesn't have to plug the well. They can just keep the well operating and pay the bond. And if they're low risk, that shouldn't be, as I said, that shouldn't be a significant financial outlay.
So what if we move the 15% to 25%?
That's certainly a possibility.
30%.
Well, I mean, are we doing an auction?
I'm just looking for the threshold where the applicant, and I think this one is mostly going to be on OCD, to really try to explain to us. I've seen all the exhibits, but I still feel like active well that is in compliance should be left alone, because the applicant's objective is still going to be achieved where all these marginal wells, we put that bond of $150 thousand on, because OCD will be responsible if, let's say, these wells are not plugged.
I think that there is room to think about where the threshold should best fall. You know, it's kind of a risk judgment factor, and ultimately it's the OCC's determination of what is the risk tolerance of the state.
Mr. Peltz, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I do appreciate discussion. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Commissioner Bloom on the platform, do you have questions of Mr. Peltz?
I do. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and pardon my virtual presentation. I'm a little under the weather today. Mr. Peltz, good morning.
Good morning.
I know I've been through this a few times, but just once more, how many wells are there in the applicant's estimation that are in danger of becoming orphaned?
There's around 50,000 wells that are marginal as we define or inactive.
Okay, that's the number I got to from your conversation with Dr. Ampoma. Thank you. Mr. Peltz, I'm guessing you're familiar with Einstein's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
I am.
Do you recall how long New Mexico has had a reclamation fund?
I don't know, actually. I imagine many decades.
My research shows since the 1980s, so I think that's consonant with many decades. Thank you. And yet, in your opinion, has this fund plugged all the wells it should have? Has it stopped new wells from becoming orphaned or being in jeopardy of becoming orphaned?
No, the rec fund certainly can't do that. All it can do is try to plug wells that have already become orphaned. And obviously, there's still a lot of orphaned wells left to plug.
So what does this approach do differently? Does it create an impetus to keep wells from becoming beneficial, non-beneficial or marginal?
It does. It both incentivizes increased production where possible, and it incentivizes the operators to plug the wells when that's no longer possible.
When I look at the first document filed in this case, I see June of 2024. Does that sound about right to you?
I believe so, yes.
And would you believe me if I said we had a 60-day legislative session between June of 2024 and now that ran from mid-January to mid-March of 2025?
Yes.
So our New Mexico legislators had approximately 6 months between the beginning of the session and June of 2024 to introduce a bill on this topic, had they chosen to do so.
That sounds correct to me.
But the legislature didn't pass any legislation in this area in 2025, did it?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you believe there are instances when it takes years for a bill to pass despite promises and people's belief that action is imminent?
Yes, years, decades.
Yeah. Yesterday there was a comment made that, well, I'd say, would you believe that me if I said that, we were called bureaucrats yesterday, are the designees of the governor and or her administration or the commissioner of public lands?
That's my understanding. Regulators are hardworking people.
Thank you. And that these elected officials, the governor and the commissioner of public lands, that they can ask their administrations to pursue rulemaking in line with state law?
They can, and it would be inefficient if they couldn't.
And do you believe that our duties at the OCC include rulemaking?
Yes, and you're certainly well situated to do it since you have minute understanding of what's happening on the ground.
And do you also believe that the public has the right to petition us to do rulemaking?
I do.
And that they have the right to do this regardless of what the legislature is doing or not doing?
Yes, that's part of the system.
And that we have a duty as the OCC to respond to that petition?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Peltz, for helping me clear up some potential issues there around the role of the OCC, rulemaking, and how there are bifurcated paths in our state to getting to a goal. There can be a legislative path, and there can also be a rulemaking path. Mr. Peltz, thank you for your time. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bloom. Chair Chang, do you have questions of Mr. Peltz?
I think it's all been covered quite thoroughly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Peltz. Any reason not to excuse him? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Shall we take a 10-minute break while we switch parties here? All right, let's do that. Come back at 10:10. I think I have. I don't know where Chair Chang is, but I imagine. Let's see. Let's come back from the break, please. All righty. We're coming back from a break now. And I believe we turn to the Oil Conservation Division to hear from their 5 witnesses. Mr. Tremaine?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I do intend to start with the brief opening remarks, and then we will proceed with the revised testimony order, starting with Mr. Diede.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Madam Hearing Officer, Chair, commissioners, parties, and participating members of the public. I want to start out by thanking everyone for the obvious immense amount of effort and attention that goes into preparing for a hearing of this nature, and particularly on a critically important topic. OCD participates in this hearing in support of the petition. And really, that's what I'm going to try and address at a high level now. Why do we support this petition? That's the billion-dollar question. I've had the pleasure of representing OCD since January of 2021. I actually started here in the middle of the waste rule hearing, parts 27 and 28. That period of time happens to be very important for in the discussion of orphan wells, because 2021 is when OCD effectively implemented its current civil penalty authority and actively picked up enforcement related to inactive wells after a period where OCD did not have civil penalty authority. That period represents more recent, more consistent, and more detailed information regarding orphan wells, both in terms of enforcement, in terms of coordinating and communicating with operators of various different sizes and types, and in terms of the plugging program. Later on, Mr. Powell will discuss some of the details, the lessons learned from the enforcement and implementation of the orphan well plugging program that I just referenced. But in summary, the division notes 2 key deficiencies in the existing rule structure. First, the existing rules do not allow for the timely and effective enforcement for the plugging of inactive wells. By the time an actionable violation exists on an individual well basis, that well by definition has not produced and thereby has not generated any revenue for the operator for 15 months. Okay, that's 12 months of inactivity under 19.15.5.9, and then 3 months where the operator has not plugged a well under 19.15.25.8. Further, by the time an operator's portfolio falls out of compliance with OCD rules, the operator will have experienced reduced or no revenue from the portfolio for at least 15 months. In OCD's experience, enforcement actions of any form seeking operator compliance regarding, or specifically plugging, in this posture are ineffective. Despite diligent efforts by OCD and good faith attempts to communicate to accommodate responsive operators, we settle all these cases every time, everywhere it's possible. It's simply too late. The operator's not in a position when their portfolio is largely inactive to plug their own wells or to comply with commitments they make in settlement agreements. In the event, the second deficiency is that in the event that OCD plugs and abandons wells or associated production facilities, and this is a very important point, the focus of the language and the discussion is largely on wells, but we will talk at some length through our presentation that we need to talk about associated production facilities and everything that goes along with that as well. So payable financial assurance in that event is wholly inadequate. The fact patterns related to this conclusion are complicated, but even in the case where an operator is fully compliant with the latest financial assurance rules, there is a massive delta between potentially, and I highlight potentially, payable financial assurance and the division's cost for wellbore plugging. And when I say that, I'm not talking about surface reclamation, I'm not talking about remediation, I'm not talking about other associated expenses. There is a delta between payable financial assurance and wellbore plugging. This does not factor in those other costs, and redemption of financial assurance and OCD's ability to redeem that is wholly inadequate to reimburse expenses from the reclamation fund. And I just highlight for the commission's attention that the reclamation fund statute does authorize and I think implies a mandate that the division should be attempting to redeem FA and overage expenses from operators or other parties where OCD expends monies from the reclamation fund. That is an authorized task of the division. It's in the plain language. The requirements of the bipartisan infrastructure law grant also expect the division to attempt to recover both FA where applicable and seek indemnification where possible. So those are the two key deficiencies. Now, I think there's also a couple questions that I believe will come up directly and thematically during the course of the hearing. We will hear a lot about industry's 95% success rate. What does that mean? So first of all, the division is not going to stipulate to this number, but I do think it's useful to establish a floor for discussion of orphan well liability under the existing rules. If you think about the statement, like, look, we're 95% compliant. If you think about that has a compelling ring to it, right? You think about if I was in school and I took a test, I got 95% on a test, you got an A, right? But that's not a compelling analogy when we're talking about liabilities that are known for years and decades in advance. A more appropriate analogy would be me saying, look, I have a 95% compliance rate of not speeding through red lights at Cerritos and St. Francis. If I have a 5% failure rate, and as some people do, and travel through a red light at 60 miles an hour, I'm posing a significant social risk. So the scope and cost of the 5% failure rate, which seems to be generally accepted and consistent with the national average, that's what we need to be focusing on. That 5% failure rate, when you look at the actual costs associated with those failures, constitutes a remarkable social cost and risk that will require consistent OCD plugging for likely more than the next decade where we sit today. All right. The other concept that I want to address, I think will come up, is this concept of a bad actor. What does a bad actor, operator, or entity mean in the context of orphan wells? And unfortunately, in this context, I don't think it's actually a useful concept because the violating conduct is by definition typically engaged in by an entity that's effectively dissolved when we're talking about large-scale inactivity. There are specific cases where we can note that an operator went inactive, evaded some notification or certification or compliance scheme, and then got a new company and had further problems, but that's atypical. What the issue is that operators who aren't planning appropriately for a certain stage of well production and development, if they go out of business or they or effectively dissolve, even if they don't formally dissolve or file bankruptcy, there's not for the right analogy, but yeah, there's not much juice there for the squeeze if we're going to look for indemnification or recovery for orphan well plugging. So whether it's intentional or happenstance is not really consequential in my opinion. Industry recommendations for compliance standards seek to move enforcement triggers to a completely useless and untimely point in time. For instance, attempting to define beneficial use under our rules as 5 years of inactivity is moving the needle in the exact opposite direction of where it needs to go. So that's the concept of bad actor, and this comes up a lot. But I just want to clarify for the commission, we're not talking about operators in a posture where they're highly likely to continue once they're completely out of compliance operating, and then there's a recurring violation. It's like they're kind of out of business at that point. So in support of the petition, we're going to call 5 witnesses. Loren Diede is the first witness. I will be conducting the examination. He is a petroleum specialist who will discuss specific examples of OCD orphan well plugging experiences. And we hope that that helps explain the challenges and uncertainty that's inherent in plugging orphan wells, as opposed to operator conducted plugging experiences. The second witness, who will be called Mr. Hall, is John Garcia. He's the supervisor of OCD's Engineering Bureau Special Projects Group. He will discuss the development of OCD's Master Orphan Spreadsheet, which is OCD Exhibit 17, which is a living document compiling information on OCD's recent plugging activities. Mr. Garcia will also discuss specific examples of wells which would fall into the proposed category of well classifications in the petition. After that, Rosa Ramiro is OCD's Environmental Bureau Chief. She will testify as to various challenges in OCD environmental remediation associated with orphan wells and associated production facilities. We hope that this information helps explain the truly significant but highly variable remediation costs for orphan wells and those associated production facilities. I will call Ms. Ramiro. After that, Mr. Hall is going to call Justin Wrinkle. He's OCD's Engineering Bureau Chief. He will testify as to his professional experience in managing low-producing wells on the operator side. And then we are going to, at the end here, we're going to call Mr. Brandon Powell. Mr. Powell is OCD's Deputy Director. He's batting cleanup, and we'll discuss OCD's perspective on each proposed update to the rule, OCD's process of developing feedback to the original proposal, response to the oft and future cited LFC report, lessons learned from our enforcement and plugging programs, and if there are specifically programmatic and implementation questions, they're best addressed to Mr. Powell. I'm thinking of you, Commissioner Mpoma. I know from some of your questions, we're going to have a robust discussion. In summary, OCD's support of this petition is intended to achieve 2 results. First, increase operator-led compliance by compelling informed decisions regarding plugging and compliance options at a point in time where operators remain active and are generating revenue. All right. The second one is to close the gap between OCD's expected plugging costs and recoverable FA. They're 2 very different objectives. There's get operators to clean up their own stuff across the board, fix the delta between 95 and 100%. And the second one is where OCD does have to step in with its limited resources, limited reclamation fund, et cetera. We can actually recover meaningful funds and use those for future activities. So to achieve these goals, OCD specifically recommended in response to the petitioner's original petition, thresholds that focus the proposed changes on the highest risk wells and the highest risk operator well portfolios. And those thresholds proposed by the division fall well below the generally accepted definitions of either marginal or stripper wells. All right, we're talking about a quarter or a tenth of what the stripper well definition is. I want to underscore again how conservatively OCD aimed with those recommendations. Mr. Bau will be able to speak to that. OCD's learned from over 5 years of related enforcement and 2 years of stakeholder engagement on this topic, took concepts from various other states and attempted to apply those lessons learned in our red line proposal. I want to thank the petitioners for their willingness to incorporate our recommendations and extensive discussions. And I'm going to say that unfortunately, I've never seen a red line or concrete proposal from NMOGA or IPA&M. There are some recommendations that have been submitted in this hearing. but nothing that meaningfully incorporates or earnestly attempts to address the deficiencies that I described earlier, which we communicated very clearly. Why am I bringing this up? I am not attempting to be hostile to a group of people that I've otherwise noted engage with OCD in a productive and professional manner. I'm highlighting this to point out that there is a critical point here where ultimately, for whatever reason, the regulated community as a whole is either structurally incapable or unwilling to solve this problem. What does that mean? That means that the government must take appropriate action. That's a problem that is obviously within the purview of the legislature. We stipulate to that. We agree with that. It's also already well within the purview and statutory authority of the division and this commission. And so that's what we're doing here today. And at the summation of the record, we will ask the commission to adopt the petition along with any changes that are deemed necessary by the commission throughout the conduct of the hearing. That will resolve my my opening statement. And Madam Hearing Officer, if we're ready to proceed, I would call Mr. Loren Diede to the stand. Due to, we've been moving a little faster than expected, and because of travel arrangements and the duty locations of various OCD staff, we intend to call our first witnesses virtually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tremaine. Oh, I see Mr. Diede on the platform here. Mr. Diede, would you spell your first and last name, please?
Yes, it's Loren, Loren, Diede, Diede.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Tremaine.
Yep. Madam Hearing Officer, I'm going to ask Mr. Hall to assist me in sharing the slides. So I would ask that he have screen share capability, and he'll pull up Mr. Diede's slides. Good morning, Mr. Diede.
Good morning.
All right. Could you please tell the commission what your current job title is with the OCD?
Yeah, my current job title is petroleum specialist, and I am focused almost exclusively on working with orphan wells and forced plugging wells.
Did you prepare in advance of this hearing a direct testimony, which is labeled as OCD Exhibit Number 4?
I did.
And did you prepare a CV, which is labeled as OCD Exhibit Number 5?
I did.
And did you prepare a visual aid, which is labeled as OCD Exhibit 6?
Yes.
Are those exhibits prepared by you true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, they are.
Do they require any corrections?
No major corrections, one typo that I found, and that was all.
Okay. Could you tell us where the typo is? Is it in your direct or the slide?
It's on the slide. And
okay.
I'll point that out as we get to it.
Very good. Do you adopt and affirm your direct testimony for your as your testimony today?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We have up your visual aid, OCD Exhibit Number 6. At this time, Mr. Diede, I'd ask you to provide a summary of your testimony for the commission.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Hall, and thank you, Mr. Tremaine. And Madam Hearing Officer, due to some hearing issues on my side, I prefer to use a headset during this testimony.
Thank you very much.
Okay, as stated previously, my name is Loren Diede, petroleum specialist with OCD. I have been with the OCD since February of 2024. I have a bachelor's degree in geology from the University of North Dakota. I have about 50 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, domestically in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Oklahoma, and Texas. I began my career as a wireline logging engineer after graduation from the university. And then after doing some wireline logging work, I proceeded to work in the service business with hydraulic fracturing, design and supervision, drilling and cementing, design and supervision, workovers, design and supervision, and most recently plugging and abandonment, design, supervision, and regulatory oversight. And just a very brief summary of my CV. As stated previously, bachelor's degree from the University of North Dakota, wireline logging engineer, then hydraulic fracturing and cementing. And at one point in 1998, I had the opportunity to become, through BJ Services joint venture, the country technical manager of Algeria operations. In 2004, I began Diede Consulting Services, focusing on hydraulic fracturing, drilling and cementing, well workovers, and plugging and abandonment. And most recently through NMOCD, starting last February, February of 2024, working with P&A's regulatory and operational oversight. I'd like to start with a definition that I am going to be using for orphan wells. There have been different definitions thrown about. New Mexico has not yet, as far as I can tell, given us an official orphan well definition. I think pretty much what I'm using is the standard understanding of what an orphan well is. And this is to quote, a well where the OCD has deemed through various methods, such as hearing orders, ACOI, or other methods, that no viable operator exists to perform the necessary plugging and remediation of this well. That is the definition I'm going to be following. Along with that, and overlapping in some regards, is force plugging. Force plugging are wells where various regulatory agencies, such as the State Land Office or the Bureau of Land Management, is requiring an operator to plug a well for which there is no operator of record anymore. And through different obligations that the operator has through leaseholds and what have you, an operator is now being asked to and obligated to plug a well. This is also what I will call force plugging. So between orphan well and force plugging, there are some overlaps, and most of my time is spent working on both of those together. Non-orphan well, of course, is a well that's plugged by an operator of record, kind of in the conventional manner in which we would normally conduct operations and plugging operations. The New Mexico Administrative Code, NMAC, if we will, 19.15.25.10. And the exact quote of that is, before an operator abandons a well, the operator shall plug the well in a manner that is permanently confines all oil and gas and water in separate strata in which they are originally found. Now, that is a rather simplistic statement. What it takes to comply with that and to plug a well adequately, safely, and also isolate the fluids in the different strata as indicated is somewhat more difficult and takes a lot of more time and money than we often would wish it did. Most of the difficulties that we have and encounter are downhole conditions of the well that cannot be estimated with any degree of certainty before the operations begin. We also want to make certain that to not only do this to comply with the NMAC 1915-2510, that we also are complying with the pre-published NMOCD conditions of approval that kind of guide how we are going to accomplish that goal. The information that's available for any given well study, the history and condition of the well, is not always completely available, as the ownership of many of these wells that become orphan wells or sometimes forced plugging wells, the ownership has changed numerous times. And it is obvious that these are often divested numerous times, and with every transaction, the quality of the data diminishes significantly. The OCD well files are often a main source of information that we have to deal with, and it's what the plugging contractors and the operators that are conducting the forest plugging operations have to rely on, because the well files from the companies that drilled and owned the wells over a period of time are probably no longer in existence. And if they are not accessible to the people that are conducting and preparing to do the P&A. So some of the well condition factors that would contribute to the difficulty of some of our P&As, and I'm going to inject just a real quick side note here. I hear often on comments about reactivation of wells, and where wells should be reactivated so that they don't become orphan or don't need to be plugged. What I have seen so far is that most of the wells that are in a position where they have to be plugged and are orphaned already, the conditions, the mechanical integrity of the well bore, and the conditions downhole in this well would make it that reactivation is not a viable option at this point. So going forward, saying that, okay, now we're going to plug the well, some of the conditions that are going to come into play, stuck and parted rods. That's something we run into very often. Stuck and parted tubing, parted casing, unstable ground around the well. And sometimes the wellhead actually breaks off. You have unexpected pressures or flow coming from the well. We'll have examples of all of those here in just a little bit. So. Next slide, please. Okay, now just to illustrate some of the things that have been just mentioned, I prefer to call some of these wells neglected wells. And this is a photo of some severely corroded tubing that, as we were trying to pull the tubing out of the well, it parted. And this is a picture of why it parted. It had been corroded to a point where it no longer had any integrity, and as we were pulling it out, it could not support the weight of the tubing below it, which in this particular case was about another 1,000 feet of tubing that was left in the hole because it broke off at this point. So now a fishing operation has to begin. And the fishing operations to go in and fish out the remaining tubing in a case like this is probably one of the most time-consuming operations that we encounter when we have difficulties. Next, please. Another is the stability of the ground around the wellhead. In this particular case, this is one of two wells in a fairly close together in the same field. We went out with the rig to rig up on the well and proceed with our P&A operations. And in the preparation and writing of the P&A procedure, without going to the site itself, there's no way to know that this is what we would encounter. And we couldn't tell how far down this cavity went. So we had to take quite a few precautions to be able to assure that we could safely get the rig in sight and be able to support the rig. We had no idea of what the stability of the ground around this area was going to be and how far it extended or how deep. So that was just one more illustration. And sometimes this happens more frequently than we would like to think, where you can see the tubing coming out of the tubing hanger on the top of this wellhead. Those slips and the supporting hanger should come free and come out of that bowl, but they did not. They are corroded and rusted in place, and when we pulled on the tubing to dislodge that out of the wellhead, the casing below the wellhead broke off, and now we have an open situation where the well is open to the atmosphere. We have no way to control this thing. If it wanted to blow or have any issues with bringing fluids to the surface and pressure, we have no way to control this. Fortunately, in this case, and most often when this does happen, the well is depleted to the point where it is virtually dead, and we don't have that risk factor. But it could definitely be a different scenario. As I stated previously, it is difficult to predict ahead of time what type of operational difficulties, time, and expense are going to be involved in plugging some of these wells. In this particular case, the Cato San Andres field in Chaves County, New Mexico, we were doing some plugging, and we have two different wells that I would like to show as a comparison that were drilled in the same area by the same operator within several weeks of each other, and are drilled in almost identical way and cased in almost identical way. We had the same P&A operator going to location to do this work. They had also contracted the same P&A contractor. And we ended up with a vastly different scenario between these two wells. Next, please. So the Cato San Andres number 50 and number 164, 150 and 164. As you can see by the legal description, these are very close together. The depth is similar, casing is similar. The spud date is within several weeks of each other. When we look at under operational category, the listing of what took place to plug these wells, the number 150 well took 35 days. Number 164 well took 7 days. And there is no way to know this until you get into the well, open the well, and start doing your operation. One of the major issues I touched on previously in that illustration was the fishing operations. Stuck pipe with multiple tool failures, and we had to do repeated cementing to be able to get down deep enough that we could actually plug this well properly. The fishing operations, multiple attempts were made to retrieve the stuck tubing and parted pipe that was in the well. Number 164 well, we had no issues like that at all. And on the cementing, the number 150 well, we would pump cement plugs in place and they did not stay due to different conditions downhole. The cement basically would travel by gravity down and not stay in position where it should be over the interval to be plugged. Number 164 well, we didn't have those issues. There were some mechanical issues on both wells, a little bit more on the number 150 well, and sometimes these mechanical issues aren't necessarily just things that happen with the rig on location. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're also caused by some of the conditions and the operating difficulty and stresses involved in what you are trying to accomplish with that rig to get either cement placed or getting the tubing out of the hole or going in with your work string tubing and getting it stuck, and different things that you have to deal with can sometimes also cause some of the mechanical failures. And overall, these two wells had significantly different complexity in achieving our goal. We were able to get both of these wells adequately plugged and be able to comply with isolating the various zones that needed to be isolated and complying with the NMOCD conditions of approval that had been applied to both of these wells equally, so that we had a good, safe plugging operation. Next, please. We also have to deal with previously plugged wells. In this particular case, in Lee County, the community of Jal, New Mexico, a landowner in the city of Jal called our OCD office in Hobbs and said, there's an old P&A marker outside of one of my outbuildings and it's leaking and it smells bad. This gentleman also happened to have a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of experience in the oil and gas business, and realized that if he was smelling rotten egg smell coming out of that marker, that it was most likely hydrogen sulfide gas and had to be reported and something needed to be done. So as soon as that call came in, our supervisor from Hobbs and one of our cementing contractor supervisors went to location to investigate and saw that this P&A marker that the gentleman had called about was within about 25 feet of an outbuilding. And they did a gas test real quick with a monitor, and they were getting readings of 100 ppm hydrogen sulfide gas, and they were also getting some volatile indications on their LEL readings. An assessment was made of the location, and preparations were starting to be made for how to get in and approach this and get this done. We cordoned off the area, talked to the folks at Shell, New Mexico, the emergency responders, police department, city council, and alerted them to what was going on and had them help us kind of keep people out of the area, and started making arrangements on how to get this well taken care of. We started immediately looking at well records that were available within the OCD website. And that was the only indication of any records that were going to be available, because the company that drilled this well in 1951 was long gone. The well was plugged in 1953. And the records that we did have were very sketchy. The records indicated that after they drilled the well and set 7-inch casing, that the casing was cemented in 2 different stages. We'll see that on the diagram here in a minute. But there was no indication of how much cement was pumped or whether they had any indication of how high the cement on the outside of the casing would be found. So they did say in their plugging paperwork in 1953 that 10 sacks of cement had been placed in the casing at 1,900 feet, and 10 sacks had been placed at the surface. Well, in 7-inch casing, that is approximately, depending on the type of cement they used, is about 50 feet of cement plug height. So they had 2 of those, one at 1,900 feet and one at the surface. Now, the well had been plugged, capped, and the wellhead had been removed. A plate was welded to the top of the casing with the marker, and, the marker was leaking. So we knew that whatever was between the surface and downhole was leaking and had no integrity. So to do this carefully, we had to approach it as if the worst case scenario were going to be experienced. Next, please. We didn't know what was going to happen after we removed the P&A marker. There was something leaking. We didn't know where, how. So we started to excavate around the wellhead so we could get down deep enough to be able to do what we needed to do to get a blowout preventer in place so that we could open the well with the blowout preventer in place. To do that, since we also had some LEL readings and we had volatiles, as we were excavating, we had nitrogen blanket being placed around the area to minimize any chance of fire as we were digging out this, and also the people working on the crew that was working in the area. We had to get them recertified, make sure their H2S monitoring and safety training was up to speed so they could work in that environment. We had to go in with supplied air for the crew working in that environment, not just for the H2S and the volatiles, but also because of the nitrogen that we're replacing into the area to protect from flash fires. We had to fabricate a number of different things to be able to get the BOP mounted onto this odd sides casing. There was no wellhead, no flanges or anything for us to mount the BOP on. So all of this had to be fabricated, and we had to be able to install it on top of this casing without not having to weld it, because we didn't want to be welding in that atmosphere. So everything had to be clamped and bolted in place. It took a great deal of fabrication. It took us about 10 days to get this all done so we could get the BOP in place. As soon as the BOP was in place, we were able to remove the marker and then start going into the well with a mill and some work string tubing. What we found at the surface is there was no cement at the surface. The 10 sacks that had been placed at the surface were not found. We didn't see them, didn't feel them. Went on down, got to 1,900 feet, didn't find any cement there either. So what happened? Well, with time, and we're looking at a significant amount of time here, cement will deteriorate. And depending on the type of cement they used, we don't know what that was. It may not have been adequate to the task, but with the amount of time that transpired, no cement was found. So we did get down to the bottom of the well with the H2S alarms continually going off because the well was still producing H2S, and we circulated some scavenger to mitigate the H2S. Along with that, keeping everyone out of the way, keeping our safety company in place with their monitors to do everything we would normally do in an environment like that, in a workover situation or a drilling situation. So that was added cost, added time. We ran a cement bond log to evaluate our casing condition and cement condition. What we found was that most of the casing that had been placed and cemented in 1951 was unsupported by cement. And so we started designing, placing cement as indicated by the CBL results and going along with conditions of approval to kind of satisfy what we were needing to accomplish here to get this well plugged adequately. It took us until September 29th, and we had started in September 6th. So it took us 23 days to get to a point that we got this well properly plugged. Next, please. Based on the information that we were able to see and able to find, this is what the well should have looked like. You can see the casing. There was cement on the outside of the casing. There's an open hole section down below that was indicated on the records. TOC, or top of cement, there on the right-hand side with a question mark. We didn't know where we would find it to be. They did have a diversion tool, a DV tool in place, so they did do 2 stages of cement, 2 relatively small stages of cement, and this is kind of what we were dealing with. That's all the information we had. Next, please. This is what it looked like when we finished. We had to place cement, a dark gray inside the casing is the cement that we placed inside the casing, and the dark gray, as you see towards the top on the outside, is where we actually perforated and placed cement, not just inside the casing, but outside the casing to seal the casing to the formation. And we had to do that in a number of places for a number of different reasons. I'm not going to belabor the point, but you can see how much they said they had. And at that particular time in 1953 was probably considered adequate and was approved as a plugging plan. But to do it by today's standards, this is what we ended up having to do to get this well plugged in a fashion that complies with our rules and conditions and standards for today. Couple of photos from that call number 1. The first photo is showing us the outbuilding that the gentleman had and the P&A marker proximity to the outbuilding. Numerous buildings in the area and houses, of course, that aren't in the photo. And the middle photo is showing us the fabricated supports that we had to make in this excavated area and attached to the old casing so that we could safely and adequately get the BOP stack on at the very top to control us while we went into the hole, control any flows as we were going in to do the work inside the casing. Last photo is what we accomplished. We adequately plugged the well, had a new P&A marker with a lot of cement inside and cement in the cellar area. This was then covered and remediated so that the gentleman didn't have a mess in his backyard anymore than he had to start with, and probably better off than it was to start with. That was the end of the call number 1. Okay, another example. Buckskin Federal well number 2. I will probably say without any reservations, this is probably the most difficult well that I have had to deal with since I've been here at OCD, and probably one of the more difficult wells I've had to deal with in my career. We were notified, OCD was notified of a leak in February of 2024 on the Buckskin pad that contained 2 wells. There were Buckskin Federal number 1, Buckskin Federal number 2 wells on the same well pad. It was leaking out of a casing valve. our OCD contractor that was plugging dispatched to go ahead and investigate and repair the leak. So that was accomplished in February of 2024. It was decided then that this well needed to be plugged. It's a federal well, federal minerals. This well had been drilled in 1980 and had been converted to injection in 1984. So OCD had meetings with the BLM and discussed how we were needing to plug this well. We put together a plugging plan. The OCD submitted that through our plugging contractor to the BLM. The plugging plan was approved, and we started to move in on location with the rig and had to shut down because there was a family of owls had made a home in a horse's head on the Buckskin number 1 well. And its proximity to the Buckskin number 2 is only about 120 feet apart. So we were not allowed to continue operations until such time as the owls decided to leave on their own. We kept watching, and finally in October of 2024, the owls had left, and we were able to bring in 2 P&A rigs to simultaneously plug both of these wells. One of the wells, the Buckskin number 1, was a little over 6,000 feet deep. The Buckskin number 2 was about between 39 and 4,000 feet deep, and we decided it'd be best just to go ahead and have all the equipment on location to save time, effort, and money. We'd have all of the cementing equipment on location be shared between the 2 rigs that were on site. And it didn't work that way. Next, please. Buckskin number 2, P&A difficulties. I'll say I have a comparison coming up here on a table to show the difficulty between Buckskin Federal number 1 and number 2. The deeper well number 1 was basically plugged with hardly any issues whatsoever. Buckskin Federal number 2, this was the well that was leaking back in February of 2024, and the casing valve that had broken off and was leaking had been repaired. The area had been cleaned up. And now we were back to go ahead and plug the Buckskin Federal number 2. In an attempt to unseat the packer initially, the well started flowing up the casing. As soon as the packer was unseated, we were getting pressure up the casing. Sometimes you can allow this to flow long enough for the pressure to blow down. It didn't blow down. It started flowing water, sand, and rocks, actually 1-inch rocks. We've got pictures of those. Some of the rocks coming up the casing, annulus, between the tubing and the 7-inch casing. We attempted to kill this well with heavy mud. We could pump down the casing to kill the well, but as soon as you tried to do some work, it would start flowing again. And the fact that we had the packer unseated and that the flow, rocks, sand, and what have you, were coming up the casing, had also deposited on top of the packer. And now we not only had a flow, but we had a packer that was stuck, and we were not able to retrieve it and the tubing from the well. This was all happening in May. But with the shutdown that we had due to the owls, this didn't take us very long to get shut down, and had to stop and wait until October to be able to resume work. So the well had been just shut in as it was. And once the owls had left, we went back and with a rig and started to do the operations, the plugging operations on this Buckskin number 2. Okay, next, please. The pressure had built up as high as up to 1,400 PSI. And we were pumping at this particular point, when we started back on the job, we were pumping cement down the tubing and able to get cement down the tubing into the injection zone, and the hopes that we were able to shut the flow and pressure off. We pumped several cement plugs down the tubing. The flow did not stop. So there must have been some conduit outside the casing that was allowing this flow to come back into the casing, between the casing and the tubing, and was depositing more debris on top of that tubing packer. We had cemented inside of that tubing at 2405 feet. But when we went to find a free point with a logging tool, we found the free point of the stuck tubing at 918 feet. So there was a significant amount of debris from the packer location on up to 918 feet. So we cut the tubing at 918 so that we could try to clean this well bore out, get back on top of the tubing, fish the tubing out, and continue with our P&A. Overshot was run to latch onto the tubing. We were able to do that. We attempted to pull the tubing. It was stuck, and we kept getting additional influx of material. And now the casing had been filled up with the influx of up to 385 feet. We could kill the well, but every time we went to try to clean the well back out again, you have to release some of the pressure that you were using to kill the well, and then more material flowed in. Numerous attempts are made to pump cement to seal off this influx, and every time we got cement in place, went to clean out that cement and get a little bit deeper, the influx would overpower our ability of the rig to maintain pressure control. The well was shut in. We brought in a larger rig with a larger blowout preventer. And this was rigged up, and we changed out from the lighter 2 3/8 inch work string for heavier 2 7/8 inch work string. Now, next piece. Okay, thank you. On December 12th of 2024, while we were cleaning out material at 362 feet, a pressure surge hit and pushed 2 joints of our 2 7/8 inch tubing out of the well, up into the derrick, and bowed the tubing up in the derrick, and bent it in just a matter of seconds. At that point, everything was shut in. The well was under control. We had discussions with OCD management, engineering staff, BLM, our contractors, and decided at this point between OCD, engineering, BLM, and our contractor that the best decision was to bring in a snubbing unit that could handle this kind of pressure and keep the pressure in the well instead of having it try to blow us out. It took a while to find a snubbing unit. We got the one coming out of Louisiana, and in January 28th, the rig was on the move. The snubbing unit rig was on the move. As the snubbing unit was rigged up, we went in to tag, and the fill had now come up to 293 feet. And the snubbing unit was working to clean this out with the snubbing operation in place, with the weighted mud, various types of downhole tools, and maintaining a constant pressure on the well so that no pressure flow was going to be bringing more material in. But no matter what we did, we never got any deeper than 455 feet with the snubbing unit. Each trip that we spent getting back into the hole, we were losing and fighting and getting more and more influx of material, even by maintaining pressure control. While we were trying to attempt to clean this out, returns contained cement, metal, and wire. Where that came from, we don't know. We'd never seen that before. Formation sand and rocks were still coming out of this well. The concern of everybody at this point is that if we kept working inside this casing, we were going to be cutting holes in the casing, making the situation even worse. We didn't know that we were going to be able to maintain staying inside the casing. Next, please. So we ended up, in the end, not getting past 455 feet. But a plug of 1,120 sacks of cement was plugged down to try to seal off the area below 455 out and around the casing, wherever it was going to need to go to shut off that pressure influx. And this cement plug was then displaced about 256 feet. We were monitoring pressures, and at this point we had the pressures under control. And the snubbing unit was released. The pressure had diminished, and we were monitoring it. Snubbing unit supervisors and owners and engineers from the snubbing unit company determined that they were not going to be able to go any further with this, and were not going to be able to help us any further. We set a bridge plug at that 256 feet. The casing was pressure tested. We had good pressure test on the casing. We know we had integrity from 256 feet to surface. And we monitored this pressure for 2 weeks. The had no pressure increase, and the design, we designed the final P&A between ourselves and BLM to finish this P&A, fill this completely full of cement. And that is what we did. Casings were cut off, a P&A marker was installed, witnessed by the BLM representative, and we considered that well plugged. Table here between the federal, Buckskin Federal number 1, Buckskin Federal number 2. I'm not going to belabor the point of everything other than to indicate that on the Buckskin Federal number 1, took us 10 work days to get that work completed. The initial casing pressures are 250 PSI versus what we had seen on the Buckskin number 1 of 1,450 PSI, keeping in mind these two wells are only about 100 and some feet apart. We would have thought, before we started this project, we would have thought that the deeper Buckskin number 1 at 6,600 feet would probably be the one that could cause us some more difficulties. This was not the case. We ran the logs, got to the bottom, cleaned the well out, plugged the well with basically no issues. Buckskin number 2, we just went through the scenario there as to what took place on the Buckskin number 2, totally different scenario. So once again, cannot determine ahead of time based on well records or depth as to how these are going to react when you try to plug them.
Madam Hearing Officer, may I get a time check?
Yes, you have, let's see, 16 minutes left.
Thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Diede.
Yes, I think we can satisfy that requirement. Thank you very much. Buckskin Federal number 2, this is a very quick wellbore diagram based on the information we had at the time as to what we thought we were going to encounter. We had a packer at about 3,650 feet inside to a 7-inch casing, perforations at 3,700 to 3,800 feet. And this was tubing that was being used to inject into those perforations. Next, please. Whole different scenario here. We outlined some of the issues down at the bottom around the packer and the perforations. This was some of the cement that had been pumped down the tubing to try to shut off the influx. And then at that point, we realized that probably not all this influx was coming from the perforations, it was very likely coming from above that pack or coming into the casing on the outside of the tubing and filling up our whole space inside the casing and inside the tubing for that matter with debris. At the very upper section is where what we ended up doing with the snubbing unit and subsequently with the last P&A rig to finish this to the satisfaction of the BLM's requirements. And well, I take it back, not to the satisfaction of anybody's requirements, other than we adequately sealed the well and were able to shut off the influx and had no pressure build up in the surface casing, production casing, and we were able to pump cement and cap this well off. Okay. Number one slide on the left is what we had in February of 2024 when the casing valve failed and water and oil material was flowing out on the surface. This was repaired in February of 2024. The area cleaned up and to a point where it satisfied some of the environmental requirements for cleaning this up and then getting us ready to go in and do the P&A work. Middle slide is what we saw when we first released the packer in May of 2024. This was the material coming out of the 2-inch casing valve at the surface. The last slide is where we were going in with the larger rig and the 2 7/8 work string to kind of clean this well out. This is 2 7/8 inch tubing that you see in the derrick that had been pushed out as a matter of seconds. And at that point, the decision was made that the regular conventional rigs that we were using would not be adequate. Next, please. Left slide and the second to the left are what, if you have not been experiencing or worked around a snubbing unit, the first slide is what it looks like from a distance, a rather significant amount of equipment. The second slide shows a little closer view of what it takes to get in a position where you can snub, and basically snubbing is allowing you to travel in and out of the wellbore without any opening to the atmosphere. Everything is self-contained as you move in and out of the wellbore. The third slide is the unexpected material where we had sand and wire, cable wire of some sort, coming out as we were trying to clean out with the snubbing unit. We had not seen this before and didn't expect it, but this is what we were getting and weren't able to make any progress even with the snubbing unit. The last slide is the final P&A marker in place on the buckskin number 2. Next, please. So, in conclusion of my testimony, I just want to reiterate that it is difficult to determine with any certainty what cost and time is going to take to plug any particular well before the operations begin. Buckskin Federal number 2 and the Coal number 1 are good examples of this, but also I want to make sure to state that these are extreme examples. These are not normal. Normal operations on plugging, even on some of the orphan wells and forced plugging wells, go as procedure. But these are 2 extreme examples. Now, also, I will have to say that of the orphan wells, the neglect that these wells have probably experienced in their lifetime make them more difficult to plug than you would normally find in a normal non-orphan, non-forced plugging operation. So New Mexico, this number has been bandied about some, and it varies depending on the data source. But this was a data source that I had available to me. So we can say that somewhere between 63,000 and 72,000 wells within the state have not been plugged. Of those, how many Buckskin Federal number 2 wells are there waiting to be plugged? And then the next statement would be New Mexico has approximately 40 to 50,000 wells within the state that are plugged, and an unknown subset of those wells may have been inadequately plugged. Question there is, how many coal number 1 wells are still out there? The answer is we don't know, but we know they're there. It's just a matter of time till we deal with them. That's the conclusion of my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Diede. Madam Hearing Officer, we're not offering rebuttal or surrebuttal through Mr. Diede. So at this time, I would move admission of OCD Exhibits 4, 5, and 6, and I would make witness available for cross.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tremaine. Let me pause for a moment. In the event there's an objection to OCD Exhibit 4, 5, or 6.
I don't believe we do, Madam Hearing Officer, but if you could unmute Ms. Tripp, since she's going to cross Mr. Diede, and I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I believe I'm unmuted. And this is Ann Tripp. No objections to Exhibit 4, 5, or 6.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No objections from Namoga.
All right. Exhibits 4, 5, and 6 are admitted. Ms. Tripp, would you like to begin your questioning of Mr. Diede?
Yes, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. And good morning, Mr. Diede. I am also attending remote, so we can virtually connect here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know you have a real job with real C103Ps to review and get to because my clients are waiting for those. But I appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into preparing and to explaining, from a very fundamental level what it takes to plug and abandon a well. I do have some questions, so I'm going to try and move quickly. But if there's any difficulty understanding, through this virtual medium, please ask me to repeat. The first thing I'll just say is that I reviewed your CV, and I guess the only question I have on that is there any position that you have not held within the oil and gas industry and operating a well?
Usually when we deal with anything on the ground up, that's an area that I would hesitate to say that I have much experience in. So okay. I prefer to work below ground.
Got it. Have you been in well, that makes sense. So in term, there was one, I believe it was in slide 4 of your demonstrative, where you referenced a term called forced plugging, which sounds like where the operator who is not of record plugs a well upon request, either from the state land office or the BLM. Is that an accurate summary?
That would be my understanding of that. Yes.
Okay. And so the those wells that are forced plugged by other operators, do you know, we've been kind of bandying about the 5%, 95%. And so I'm not asking you to adopt that exact division between wells that are plugged by industry and wells that are plugged by OCD. But do you know if that forced plugging number is incorporated into wells that OCD is responsible for plugging, or are they handled differently in tallying that up?
I don't believe, in my understanding, is that those would be responsible as far as the same way that an orphan well would be. An orphan well is something that that there is no operator liable to do any or obligated to do any of that work. So in a forced plugging, you still have someone, an operator, that is obligated to work on that, and therefore should not fall through as an orphan well where the state would be using monies that the state has from whatever source to pay and furnish a PO and pay for that operation.
but in the situation of and if you're not familiar with this area, please feel free to kick me to the next witness. But where you have an operator who's been requested to plug and there's a forced plugging, that operator typically doesn't have authority or permission to enter the premises, to operate the well to the extent to plug it, unless there's been some type of enforcement action. And then the operator who's coming in is acting underneath the OCD authority. Is that right?
Not sure I totally understand the point of the question.
I'm just trying to distinguish trying to run down. We have some numbers, and there's a concept of forced plugging, and trying to understand whether the numbers of wells that operators are plugging that are not theirs, whether that's accounted for in the 5% or the 95%.
Okay, now I can understand. I can understand the question, and I will say I do not know.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then and certainly you testified a little bit earlier about excuse me, the concept of reactivation, and that when wells have been abandoned for a very long time, that they're not really a viable option for that reactivation. But at the same time, you also explained that these examples are extreme, and just looking at the Cato San Andres unit wells, there can be vast differences between those wells. Is that fair?
That would be fair, yes.
Okay. And so to the extent that one orphan well is poor casing integrity, that's not indicative of all orphan wells, and certainly not indicative of all marginal wells.
It would probably be somewhat indicative of an orphan well, because an orphan well is probably an orphan for a reason. And the reason may be that it's not a viable candidate to be reactivated or anything else be done with it. Marginal wells is a different matter. And that's something that, there's a lot of argument about different type of definitions for marginal, and I will leave that definition discussion to someone else within OCD.
All right, I will not pull up a rainbow slide. I will not force you to go through that activity then. Moving on to the call number 1 well that you discussed, where that well had been plugged in accordance with the regulations at the time in 1953. Is that right?
As near as we can tell, yes, the plugging had been approved.
And so is it your understanding under the financial assurance rules, the financial assurance, either whether a surety bond or a cash bond, that is released after a well is plugged and determined site released?
That would be my understanding, but what took place in 1953, I don't think any of us here would really know that.
Okay. But the way the rules are enforced or followed today, an operator who has some type of surety bond or cash bond in place, once they have plugged the well and OCD is inspected and released the well, that's when that bond is released from the surety.
Objection, Foundation. Mr. Diede is not the bond administrator or the supervisor in charge of that program. We do have witnesses available who will be able to talk about that. Mr. Powell can address bond release.
Sounds like a better question for Mr. Powell.
Okay, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. So the funds that were used to plug the call number 1, those were reclamation funds, correct?
Yes, I believe they were. Now, I can't say that with 100% certainty because it's been a while.
So, okay. But reclamation funds are the only, let me restate this. I'm trying to, I'll reorganize based on the fact that you've not been called to testify about financial assurance. But your understanding of the way the reclamation fund works and the way orphaned wells are plugged by the OCD, the reclamation fund does not consist of financial assurance alone.
That, I think, is an issue, once again, left to others in OCD that are more equipped to answer that.
Well, we mentioned your extensive CV, and so you've certainly operated wells in New Mexico. Is that correct?
I did not operate wells. I worked as a service engineer or as a consultant for operators.
So you didn't assist with the acquisition, drilling, or planning of wells in New Mexico?
No, I like to stay below ground, as I stated previously.
Um, so the Cato San Andreas and the Buckskin Federal, I just want to restate your testimony that those are some, or not the Cato San Andreas, the Call and the Buckskin. Those are extreme examples. Is that fair? Is that correct?
I would consider them to be rather extreme, yes.
In preparing for this testimony for the rulemaking, have you reviewed any of the other testimony provided or attended these hearings?
No, I saw some of the hearings yesterday, but that was all.
Have you reviewed the proposed rules that applicants have filed and then the revised proposed rules?
I did not review them. Anything I know about them would be just from hearing discussions, but not being involved in discussions.
Okay. Well, I guess moving on to the Buckskin Federal number 2. So that was a federal well, correct?
Yes.
Which means that it is covered by federal lease bond, either statewide or individual lease.
I would think it would have been, but I can't state that for any certainty. That's not my area.
Understand. It's also not your area then to say whether financial assurance proposed by these rules would actually affect bonding levels for the Buckskin Federal 2. You're not offering an opinion on that.
I cannot.
Do you know whether we've been using a figure of 163,000 for the cost of plugging wells by the OCD. Do you know if that figure includes the 5.2 million of the Buckskin Federal?
I do not know.
Do you know who might be the best witness to go down that rabbit hole with?
I think some of the OCD witnesses may have that in their pocket. I don't know.
Okay, all right, thank you, sir. And you also mentioned with the Buckskin Federal that certainly there's a lot of circumstances that you don't know when you get into the hole or even when you arrive on location, that there could be a family of owls nesting nearby. Is that fair?
That is also correct. And that is what shut us down, for 5 months.
So to the extent that applicants are proposing a strict compliance measure in the proposed rules where operators are no longer allowed to have any percentage of wells inactive, those circumstances that are outside of an operator's control, like a family of owls, strict compliance would mean that they're in violation of the rules, no matter how.
Objection calls for a legal conclusion. That's outside Mr. Diede's testimony.
Ms. Tripp, it does sound like a call for a legal conclusion.
Okay, well, we'll move on because I know Mr. Diede hasn't reviewed the proposed rules in any detail. So let's, I want to touch briefly your role within OCD. Are you, in addition to reviewing plugging proposals, do you also see the cost side of things in terms of invoices under the statewide pricing agreement?
My focus has been almost exclusively on the technical side. I've been here a little over a year and a half, and it takes a while to kind of establish a path, and my position has been evolving slowly, but at this point, not to the point of evaluating costs. I'm strictly sticking with the technical and operational side, trying to do what we can there to make it go as well as we can.
I understand. And to the extent that there are technical issues that may come up about whether the division needs to expend certain costs for procedures, whether it's a fishing expedition or whether it's additional equipment that weren't planned on, are you consulted in that fashion at all?
Yes, and if these are kind of an ongoing oversight with the operators, if it's a force plugging, I'll work with the operator, such as one of the operating companies that's in charge of that. Or if it is an orphan well, our plugging contractor that's contracted by the state, I will be dealing with their supervisors and kind of discussing issues as they come up. Now, on the other hand, if this is a federal well, we also keep the BLM engineer and myself in communications so that BLM and the OCD agree on the best path forward to adequately plug the well.
Okay, and I'd like to share my screen, which I should be able to do. This is Exhibit 17 from the OCD, which is the master orphan spreadsheet. And you should be seeing what looks like an Excel spreadsheet within the window. I'm hoping, is it large enough, or I can make it a little bit larger?
I can see it.
Okay, because you discussed in your direct testimony the Cato San Andreas Unit 164 and the Cato San Andreas Unit 150 wells, which are also federal wells. And there was a column S, pluggable. And so I didn't know if you'd seen this. Have you seen this spreadsheet before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, all right. And I don't know who Legal and Jim are necessarily for who's answering these questions, but in terms of who was plugging Cato San Andreas 150 and 164, line 31 says yes if BLM request, and then line 949 says BLM dash shell. So were those wells forced plugging wells, or were those wells that were deemed orphaned and then an OCD contractor plugged those wells?
I know Shell was plugging the wells, but of course Shell is no longer an operator within New Mexico. All of the legal things that took place to get it to that point had all taken place prior to my arrival at OCD. So I don't think I can speak to that with any clarity.
I understand. So you can't say for sure whether the funds to plug the Cato San Andreas 164 or the 150 came out of the reclamation fund, or whether it was a force plugged well that was plugged by another operator.
I would not be able to answer that accurately.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. And so to the extent that you're involved just on the technical side, you're not reviewing plugging invoices for per diems or for a crew number or for mileage charges?
No.
Do you know who at OCD performs that duty normally?
There are clerical and administrative people that concentrate on that.
Earlier, we heard some testimony about whether there's a correlation between depth and well plugging costs. And are you familiar with the current regulations for financial assurance and plugging bonds?
Once again, I would have to say not very familiar with, but have heard references to that.
Okay. Well, in your prior to coming to the OCD, I believe your testimony is you spent 40 to 50 years as a contractor doing workover or plugging operations for wells.
Yes.
Okay. And so in your experience, in that, especially in New Mexico, whether the San Juan Basin or Permian, do you believe that there's any correlation between depth of the well and plugging costs?
Generally, but not necessarily always.
Okay. And so generally meaning that the deeper a well, the more cement, the more number of plugs you will need to plug the well. Is that fair?
That would be a fair statement.
Okay. And to the extent that you're going to need more materials, there will be more waiting time for cement to cure, which increases standby costs. That would drive the cost of the well to plug a well up?
That could be a factor, yes.
So you've been in the industry for a fair amount of time, and that is a compliment.
It's not always, but thank you.
Well, I haven't driven you off yet. So, are you familiar with the operator of certainly OCD has plugged a lot of Cato San Andreas unit wells. Are you familiar with the operator who calls that?
I have been in communication with them from time to time when those were also federal and the BLM was involved primarily, and there would be times that I would be asked to give an opinion.
Okay, and that operator that we're speaking of, some may feel that they should not be named, but I believe it's Kano Petro. Is that correct?
I believe, yes.
Okay, and
I
are you
believe so.
familiar? Yes. Okay. Are you familiar with the reason the reason behind this orphaning in terms of Kano Petro's bankruptcy and how much money the OCD's actually recovered from them?
I am not.
Okay. In terms of the Buckskin Federal number 2, when you were reviewing the well file that you mentioned in terms of this is the only information that we have to go forward from, did you review the changes of operators behind that well?
No, I did not.
Okay, so you're not familiar that there was already an ACOI in place between Lenexco and Energy Acumen at the time that Acumen took over?
I don't know all the ins and outs of some of those, like the ACOIs. Those are things that I'm familiar with the terms, but not necessarily with all the details. And so I would have to say no.
Okay, thank you. And then I just wanted to touch on one of the points you made during your summary of your direct testimony. And I think it was, I apologize, I'm not sure which well we were talking about at the time, but the phrase was, this was depleted until the point the well was dead. Maybe it was the call, but it referred to how much risk you had to approach the well. Do you recall that statement?
Re-ask that again, please.
Well, the phrase that I wrote down was when you were approaching to plug and abandon a certain well, that it was depleted to the point the well was dead.
I don't recall making that statement exactly in those words. But sometimes if you have some minor pressure, you can blow it down to the point where you can work on it without the small amount of pressure that had built up over time when it was shut in.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. I do believe it was with respect to the amount of pressure in the well. And so to the extent that the pressure is low, is merely pressure being low in a well representative of recoverable hydrocarbons for that well?
No, because there again, I would leave that for reservoir engineers to work on or answer that more carefully. But when you're just working on a well, if there's a small amount of pressure that is built up over time, and if it depletes very quickly, then that would indicate to me that there are no hydrocarbons there of any consequence.
And are you referring specifically to the primary production period?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Are you generally familiar with the percentage of recovery ranges between primary, secondary, and tertiary?
Not to a point where I could speak on it with any accuracy.
Okay. All right.
I would leave that to production folks.
Thank you. So just to the extent that you make a comment about the amount of pressure in a well, you're not making a statement or offering an opinion about potential future life or purposes of that well.
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to review my notes very quickly. I don't want to take up more time than I have to, but I believe I have covered all the areas and questions that I had for you, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Tripp. Mr. Spazo, would you like to begin your questioning or take the lunch break?
I can begin my question.
All righty.
Good morning, Mr. Diede. My name is Miguel Suazo, and I'm the attorney representing Namoga in this proceeding. How are you this morning?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we certainly appreciate your testimony today, and I just want to clarify a few things based upon your slides and what you've told your counsel and counsel for IPA&M. Just to confirm, you joined OCD recently in February of 2024, correct?
That is true.
And prior to that, your work was primarily a consultant or field supervisor for plug-in and workover types of operations. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
And just to clarify the scope of your testimony in this case, you are not offering an economic or policy analysis of financial assurance. Is that right?
That is correct. I am not.
So your testimony is limited to plug-in field work, yes?
In this testimony, yes.
Okay. Now, the two wells that you've gone over in detail, the call number 1 in JAL and the Buckskin Federal number 2, these are extraordinarily extreme and challenging plugging jobs, correct?
Yes, and they were intended to illustrate that.
And has OCD done any sort of statistical analysis of how many wells that experience these types of extreme issues exist?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. What percentage of wells the OCD plugs would you say are more of the routine nature? And are you able to put a general percentage on that? Is it 90%, 95%?
That is a percentage number that I don't feel comfortable stating other than I would say a high percentage of wells. Without any data to back it up, a high percentage of wells is probably experience a lot less difficulty than those two illustrations.
Okay. Then I guess just to summarize what you can say about the nature of the wells OCD plugs is that the vast majority of them are routine pluggings.
I'm not sure how we can define routine. They all vary.
Sure, but I guess routine in the sense that they don't take an inordinate amount of time and they don't generally exceed, a extraordinarily high monetary threshold.
Again, a very difficult question to answer with any certainty.
And it's not data that OCD, I guess, tracks?
I have not tracked that, and I'm not aware if we have.
Okay. How does OCD prioritize the wells that they plug? Is there a set of criteria that's used?
There are criteria that I may not be aware of when we're looking at issuing POs. That is outside of my scope as to how those are determined and which wells are included.
Can you clarify for the record what you mean by PO, please?
Purchase order.
Okay, thank you. Is it fair to say the OCD would prioritize the oldest or riskiest wells for plugging?
I could not say that.
Who at OCD would know the answer to that?
There are people within OCD who could probably answer that much more accurately than I can because they have the information that I don't have.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about your testimony on Rule 1915-2510, which requires operators to permanently confine oil, gas, and water in their original strata. Is that an accurate description of that rule?
That sounds like an exact stating of it, yes.
And they have to do that before that well is abandoned, correct?
That is what the NMAC you stated says that we are to do, or the operator is to do.
And that rule has been on the books for many years, is that right?
My understanding is that probably has been.
And the call number one occurred, the issues occurred with that well because it was plugged back in, I think, 1953, you said?
I know it was plugged in 1993 because I had that in the records. Other than that, I can't state anything about that plugging.
I'm sorry, did you say 93 or 53?
Oh, 1953. My apologies.
No problem. And that was decades before today's rules were in place, correct?
I can't state that with any certainty because I don't know when the rules were put in place and any modifications to them. I don't know that.
Would you say that you, sorry, go ahead.
No, I say I'm working currently with what we have currently published and trying to follow those the best we can.
So do you know anything about the rules that were in place back in the 1950s?
Most definitely not.
Okay. Is it possible there were no regulations covering the plugging of these types of wells at that time, to your knowledge?
Objection, speculation. I think it's asked and answered too.
So, Mr. Diede, I do not want you to speculate in response. Do you have an answer that doesn't require speculation?
Agreed. Thank you.
And just to confirm your testimony, it's possible that the operators at that time were conducting plugging operations in accordance with what was appropriate at that time?
I must maintain my objection. Mr. Diede's already testified that he doesn't know what rules were in place and what operators were doing in respect to the rules at the time. He's merely testified to what is in the well file with the casing diagram.
That's what I heard as well, Mr. Swazo.
I'll move on. Mr. Diede, with respect to the rule changes that are the subject of this proceeding, we're generally talking about wells that are much newer in vintage than the wells that you discussed in your testimony examples, correct?
I would say that's probably true.
Now, for some of the wells that you've discussed, you mentioned OCD was losing cement down hole. Did OCD set a cast iron bridge plug in those wells?
There are times that you can't get into the well, can't get into the casing far enough to be able to do that. So you have to do the best you can with the circumstances you have. If you can't get the tubing out, or if the casing is corroded to the point where you can't set a plug.
Okay. But do you know if in these cases with the call and the buckskin, if that was attempted or whether it was possible?
Could you rephrase that, please? Because these are two very different wells.
Well, I guess let's take each one in turn. Let's start with the call. Do you know whether a cast iron bridge plug was put in place or whether it would have been possible for purposes of plugging that well?
Are you asking about the original plugging?
No, sir. I'm asking about what OCD did.
Well, we were able to get into that well enough to set a bridge plug.
Okay. Does OCD keep track of how many wells are successfully plugged by operators annually?
I do not.
Would you say that the overwhelming majority of plugging in New Mexico is done by operators?
Well, that data is out there, I'm sure. I don't have it.
Okay. So I guess with respect to your testimony, is a fair takeaway that the rules that are in place currently are adequate for effective plugging, but the OCD infrequently or on occasion encounters extreme examples?
I think our
Objection, it's a compound question. I'm not sure what rules Mr. Suazo is referring to.
I
as
can
adequate for
refer to the
plugging.
rule. And I'm sorry, I can be clear. The rule that you referenced on your slide, 1915-2510, would you say that rule is adequate for effective plugging operations?
It had evidently been determined to be adequate by someone. I didn't make it. I follow it as best I can.
Okay, I think that's fair. Mr. Diede, would it surprise you if industry found some of these wells that are of older vintage, let's say 50 to 100 years old, and industry was able to rework them and produce them?
Would it surprise me? Quite a few years ago, I didn't think we could do horizontal wells, and now we're doing it. So anything is possible with technology advances. So I'm not sure the point of that question.
Well, do you know of any wells that are of older vintage, like the wells that you used in your description, that were reworked and able to be produced?
I can't answer that with any accuracy. I plug the ones that have been determined that need to be plugged. I don't do remediation on old wells anymore.
Okay. And just to be clear, your testimony today is not offering an opinion in any way for or against justifying increases in bonding, correct?
That is correct. I am not offering any opinions on that matter.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Diede. Namogat has no further questions for this witness.
All right, thank you very much. You've brought us to within 3 minutes of noon, so let's take our lunch break and return at 1.